It started as an ordinary afternoon, the kind you don't remember because nothing is supposed to happen. Sunlight stretched lazily across the living room floor, warming the faded rug I'd had for years. The house smelled faintly of tea and furniture polish, a quiet mix of routine and memory. I had just finished folding laundry, slowly, carefully, the way I always did now, and set it aside on the armchair. My hands weren't as steady as they used to be, but I told myself that didn't matter. I still had control. I still had my home, my family. That's what I believed, and belief, I would learn, is a dangerous thing when it's built on illusion. I remember pausing near the hallway, one hand resting against the wall, catching my breath, not from exertion, but from that quiet fatigue that seems to follow you as you get older. The house felt full, alive in a soft way. Voices drifted from the next room. My son's voice, low and familiar, and his wife's, sharper, always carrying a tone I couldn't quite name. I smiled to myself. It comforted me hearing them there. It meant I wasn't alone. It meant I still mattered. That was the first lie. At first, I wasn't trying to listen. I wasn't sneaking or spying. I was simply there. Standing in the hallway, halfway between moving forward and turning back, caught in a moment that seemed too small to matter. Until I heard my name, that's when everything shifted. "We can't keep dragging this out," my daughter-in-law said, her voice tight but controlled. Dragging what out, I frowned slightly, leaning just a little closer to the wall, not out of suspicion but curiosity. The kind you feel when your name slips into a conversation you weren't meant to hear. My son responded, quieter. I know, but it has to be done right." Done right? A strange chill brushed across my skin. Still, I told myself not to overthink it. Families talk. Plans get made. Maybe they were discussing something practical, medical arrangements, perhaps, or paperwork. I wasn't as young as I used to be. These conversations happen. That was the second lie. "The funeral needs to be simple," she continued. "Nothing extravagant. It's not like..." She stopped, but not before the word landed. Funeral. For a second, my mind didn't process it. It hung there, disconnected, like a word in a language I didn't understand. Funeral. I blinked, my breath catching in my throat. No. That couldn't be right. They weren't talking about me. They couldn't be. "We don't need people asking questions," she added. Silence followed. Heavy, intentional, and suddenly I couldn't move. The wall beneath my hand felt colder, harder. My heartbeat quickened, not with panic yet, but with something sharper, more precise, awareness. "What about the paperwork?" my son asked. Paperwork, funeral, dragging this out. The pieces didn't fit together, not in any way that made sense. Not in any way that belonged in the same room as the sunlight and the folded laundry and the quiet life I thought I was living. This had to be a misunderstanding. It had to be. But I didn't walk away. That was the moment everything changed. Not when I heard the word, but when I chose to stay. Because some part of me, deep and instinctive, whispered something I didn't want to hear. Listen. So I did. "We should move things before anything happens," she said, her voice lowering further. "It'll be easier that way." "For who?" my son replied. "For us," she snapped. "Or do you want everything tied up in legal delays? Do you want people digging around?" Digging around, my stomach tightened. This wasn't about grief. This wasn't about preparing for something inevitable. This was about control, about timing, about planning. I pressed my back against the wall, trying to steady myself. My hands felt cold now, trembling slightly, but I forced them still. No sudden movements. No noise. I didn't know why yet, but I knew I couldn't let them know I was here. "I just don't want it to look suspicious," my son said. Suspicious. The word hit harder than the rest, because now there was no confusion left to hide behind. Funeral, paperwork, suspicion. They weren't grieving, they were preparing, and I was still alive. A strange sound escaped my throat, half breath, half disbelief, but I swallowed it quickly, pressing my lips together. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure they could hear it through the wall. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. "They won't question it if it's handled properly," she said, her tone colder now. "People expect these things eventually. Eventually. But not now, not like this." Not while I was standing just a few feet away, listening to my own death being discussed as if it were an inconvenience to manage. My legs felt weak, but I forced myself to stay upright, stay quiet, stay invisible. "Have you looked at the accounts?" she asked, a pause. "Not yet," my son admitted. "You need to," she insisted. "We can't afford surprises, not with the house, not with the savings. Everything needs to be streamlined." Streamlined, I closed my eyes. There it was, not grief, not loss, money, assets. Convenience, all wrapped neatly in calm, practical tones, as if they were discussing groceries, not my life, not my death. A sharp pain spread through my chest, not physical, but something deeper, something heavier. Because I realized something in that moment that hurt more than anything else. They weren't afraid, they weren't hesitant, they were comfortable planning a world without me in it. And worse, comfortable planning how to benefit from it. No one else needs to know, she continued. At least not yet. Yet I bit down hard on the inside of my cheek, grounding myself in the sting. Think, don't react, think, because panic would give me away. Fear would make noise, and noise would end whatever fragile advantage I had left. And suddenly I understood something I hadn't before. The only power I had was that they didn't know I knew. That was it. That was everything. The balance had shifted, not in their favor, but in mine. They believed I was still unaware, still trusting, still safe. But I wasn't, not anymore. We should decide on a date soon, she said, a date. For my funeral, while I stood there, breathing, listening, alive, the room seemed to tilt slightly, the edges of my vision blurring for a moment. I reached out blindly, steadying myself against the wall. This wasn't confusion anymore, this was reality, and it was far worse than anything I could have imagined. Let's just not rush it, my son said, though there was uncertainty in his voice now. Rushing is how things get messy, she replied sharply. Do you want messy? No, they wanted control. Control over timing, over appearances, over everything, including me. I exhaled slowly, carefully, forcing my breathing to steady. If I stayed here much longer, I would collapse, or worse, I would make a sound. And I couldn't afford that, not now. Not when I was finally starting to see the truth. So I did the only thing I could. I stepped back, slowly, silently, each movement deliberate, measured. My feet barely lifted from the floor, sliding instead of stepping, avoiding any creak or shift that might betray me. Their voices continued behind the wall, still calm, still calculating. But I didn't need to hear more. I had heard enough, more than enough. Because the truth, once revealed, doesn't need repetition. It settles in your bones. It rewrites everything. The hallway felt different now, longer, colder. The sunlight that had once seemed warm now felt distant, almost artificial. Nothing had changed. And yet everything had. I reached my room and closed the door gently behind me, the soft click sounding louder than it should have. For a moment, I just stood there, still silent, listening, half expecting them to burst in, to accuse me, to reveal that they knew I had been there all along. But nothing happened. The house remained quiet, normal, deceptively so. I moved slowly to the edge of the bed and sat down, my hands resting in my lap. They were trembling now, not violently, but enough. Enough to remind me that this was real, that I wasn't imagining it, that the people I trusted, the people I loved, had just discussed my death as if it were a task to complete, a problem to solve, a timeline to manage. I let out a slow breath, staring at the floor. They wouldn't do this, I whispered. But the words sounded hollow, because I had heard them, every word, every detail. There was no denial left to hide behind, only truth. And truth is unforgiving. It doesn't soften itself for your comfort. It doesn't wait until you're ready. It arrives, and it stays. Memory surfaced then, uninvited, my son as a child. Laughing, running through this same house, his voice echoing through the halls, trusting me completely. Needing me, loving me. I closed my eyes tightly. Or had that gone? When had it changed? Or worse, had it ever been real? Another thought crept in, quieter but sharper. Or had I simply refused to see the signs, the small comments, the subtle shifts, the way I had become less important, less necessary, less valued? Care versus convenience. That was the truth of it. I wasn't family anymore. I was an obstacle, a delay, something to be managed until I was no longer in the way. My chest tightened again, but this time I didn't let the emotion take over. Because something else was rising beneath it. Not panic, not grief, something colder, clearer, awareness. If they were planning something, if this wasn't just talk but intention, then reacting emotionally would be the worst thing I could do. I needed to think. I needed to understand. And most importantly, I needed to stay alive. That thought settled heavily in my mind, stay alive. Because for the first time, it didn't feel guaranteed. I looked toward the door, listening carefully. Silence. They were still in the other room, still talking, still unaware. Good. That meant I had time. Not much, but enough to watch, to listen, to learn. Because knowledge, I realized, was my only weapon now. And I had just gained the most important piece of it. They thought I didn't know. A slow, steady breath filled my lungs, then another. My hand stopped trembling, not because I felt safe, but because I understood the stakes. Fear makes you reckless, awareness makes you careful, and careful keeps you alive. I stood up slowly, moving toward the window. Outside, everything looked the same, peaceful, ordinary, unchanged. But I knew better now, because danger doesn't always look like danger. Sometimes it looks like family. Sometimes it sounds like calm voices behind a wall. And sometimes it plans your funeral while you're still breathing. I turned away from the window, my mind sharper now, clearer than it had been in years. No more assumptions, no more blind trust, only observation, only strategy. Because whatever they were planning, I would not walk into it unaware. I would not make it easy, and I would not, under any circumstances, let them know I was no longer the person they thought I was. I moved back toward the bed, sitting down once more, waiting, listening, thinking. The first move wasn't theirs anymore. It was mine. And this time I would be ready. The strangest part wasn't the fear. It was how quickly I learned to hide it. The next morning, I woke up before dawn, not because I slept well, but because my body refused to rest. My eyes opened into darkness, and for a moment I forgot. Then I heard a faint sound in the hallway, and I remembered everything, the whisper, the plan, the funeral, my funeral. I lay still, staring at the ceiling, forcing my breathing to remain slow and even. Panic clawed at the edges of my chest, but I pushed it down deeper, burying it beneath something far more useful, control. Because fear would expose me, and exposure could cost me everything. Footsteps passed my door light. Careless, normal, that was the most terrifying part. They were normal, as if nothing had changed. As if they hadn't already begun imagining a world without me in it. I sat up slowly, pressing my feet against the cold floor, grounding myself. Every movement felt deliberate now, measured. I was no longer moving through my own home. I was navigating a space I didn't fully understand anymore, a space where I was no longer safe. But they didn't know that I knew, and that more than anything was my advantage. When I stepped into the kitchen later that morning, I smiled. It felt wrong. It felt unnatural, but it worked. "Good morning," I said, my voice steady, almost light. My son looked up first. "Morning." No hesitation, no guilt. Just normal. His wife followed, glancing at me briefly before returning to her coffee. "You're up early." "I couldn't sleep," I replied, shrugging slightly. "Must be the weather," a lie, but a harmless one, the kind they wouldn't question, because why would they? To them, I was still predictable, still harmless, still unaware, and I intended to keep it that way. I moved through the kitchen slowly, pouring tea, making small talk. Observing, that's what I did now. I observed everything. The way they looked at each other, the pauses in conversation, the subtle shifts in tone. Before, I would have missed it all. Now it was impossible not to see. "They might come by later," my daughter-in-law said casually. I asked. She hesitated just for a second. "Just to someone about paperwork." There it was again. I nodded, pretending it meant nothing. But inside, something sharpened. Because now I knew what to listen for, what to watch, and more importantly, what to remember. That day became the first of many. Days where I played a role, days where I smiled, nodded, listened. Days where I became invisible in plain sight. Because invisibility, I realized, is a kind of power. When people believe you don't see them, they stop hiding. And that's when the truth reveals itself. I started small. A phone left unattended. A document left half-folded on the table. Conversations that trailed off when I entered the room. At first, it was fragments, pieces of something larger, but slowly, painfully, they began to form a picture. There were transfers being discussed, accounts being reviewed. Names I didn't recognize appearing in quiet conversations. And always, that same tone, calm, practical, detached, as if they were organizing a move, not dismantling a life, my life. I found the first real proof 3 days later. It was an envelope, plain, unremarkable, left near the edge of the dining table. I wouldn't have noticed it before, but now I noticed everything. I picked it up slowly, glancing toward the hallway, silence. Good. Carefully, I slid a finger beneath the flap and opened it. Inside, documents, legal, structured, cold. I didn't understand everything at first, but I understood enough. Asset transfers, property discussions, signatures that hadn't been made yet, but space reserved for them, waiting for me or without me. My hands tightened around the paper. They weren't just planning, they were preparing. And preparation meant intention. I folded the papers back exactly as I found them, placing the envelope where it had been. No mistakes, no signs. Because this wasn't about confronting them. Not yet. This was about building something stronger than their plan, something they wouldn't see coming. That night, I didn't sleep at all, not out of fear, but out of clarity, because the question had changed. It was no longer, are they planning something? It was, how far are they willing to go? And more importantly, what am I willing to do to stop it? The answer came quietly, but firmly. I would survive, no matter what. The next step was the hardest. Not because it required action, but because it required trust, and trust had just been broken. But I couldn't do this alone, that much was clear, so I chose carefully, very carefully. Her name was Miriam, an old friend, someone I hadn't spoken to in months, maybe longer. But someone I knew, someone I believed hadn't changed. When she answered the phone, her voice was warm. "It's been a while." "Yes," I said softly. "It has." Was a pause, then, gently, "Is everything okay?" I almost said yes. Out of habit, out of reflex. But instead, no, I said. And the truth began to spill out, not all at once, not everything, but enough for her to understand, enough for her to hear the fear beneath my words, and she listened. That was the difference. She didn't interrupt, she didn't dismiss, she didn't explain it away, she listened. And when I finished, she said something I hadn't heard in days, something I didn't realize I needed. I believe you. Clear, real. And in that moment, the isolation cracked. Just a little. You need help, she continued. Proper help. I know, I replied. And for the first time I truly did. 2 days later, I met with a lawyer quietly, carefully, without their knowledge. His office was small but orderly, safe. He listened the same way Miriam had, but with something else behind it, experience, understanding. When I finished, he leaned back slightly, his expression serious. What you're saying is accurate, he said. This isn't just unethical. He paused. It could be criminal. The word settled heavily in the room. Criminal, not suspicion, not imagination, reality, and suddenly the situation became clearer, sharper, more dangerous. We need proof, he continued. Solid proof. Proof, I nodded slowly because I had already started. But now I knew what I was looking for, and why it mattered. The days that followed became a careful dance, observation, collection, silence. I recorded what I could, not recklessly, not obviously, but enough. Conversations, documents, patterns. Each piece small on its own, but together building something undeniable. And as I gathered more, they grew bolder, more confident, because they believed they were winning, that their plan was working, that I was exactly where they needed me to be, unaware, vulnerable, waiting. But they were wrong, because while they were planning my ending, I was preparing theirs, not with anger, not with revenge, but with truth. And truth is far more dangerous than either. The turning point came unexpectedly, as most turning points do. It was late afternoon. The house was quiet, too quiet. I moved through it slowly, listening, then voices low, urgent. I paused near the same wall where everything had begun, and I listened. We can't delay any longer, she said. We don't have a choice, my son replied. Yes, we do, she snapped. But only if we act now. Now my chest tightened. This wasn't planning anymore. This was escalation. What if something goes wrong? He asked. It won't, she said. Not if we stick to the plan. The plan, there it was again. Clear, defined, real. I didn't stay long. I didn't need to, because I already knew what this meant. Time was running out for them or for me, and I refused to be the one caught unprepared. That night, I made a decision. No more waiting, no more observing. It was time. The meeting was arranged quickly, deliberately, with the lawyer present, with Miriam there. And with everything I had gathered laid out clearly. When they arrived, they didn't expect it. That was obvious. Their expressions shifted the moment they saw the room. The documents, the people, and me sitting calmly waiting. What is this? My son asked, his voice uncertain. For the first time, I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw someone I didn't recognize. This, I said quietly, is the truth. Silence, heavy, unavoidable. You've been planning something, I continued. And I've been listening. Their faces changed, not all at once, but enough: shock, fear, denial. It's not what you think, she started. It's exactly what I think, I interrupted, calm, controlled. Unshaken. Because this time I had the power. The lawyer spoke next, clear, precise, presenting everything, every piece, every detail. And as the truth unfolded, their story collapsed, piece by piece, until there was nothing left to hide behind. No excuses, no denial, only reality and consequences, because actions, real actions, always carry them. The aftermath wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet. Final, legal steps were taken, protections put in place, distance created, necessary distance. Because some lines, once crossed, can't be undone, and shouldn't be. In the days that followed, the house felt different again. But not cold, not empty, clear. For the first time in a long time, it felt like mine, not just physically, but emotionally. Because I had reclaimed something far more important than safety. I had reclaimed myself. And as I stood by the window one evening, watching the light fade slowly into dusk, I realized something simple, something powerful. I had lost something. Yes, trust, family. Illusion. But what I had gained was stronger clarity, strength, freedom, because survival isn't just about staying alive, it's about refusing to disappear. And I hadn't, not quietly, not conveniently, not the way they had planned. I turned away from the window, the room behind me steady, grounded, real. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid, because I knew who I was now, not a victim, not a burden, not a plan waiting to be executed, but someone who had seen the truth and chosen to rise above it. And that, more than anything, was something no one could ever take from me again.